Welcome to Author Nation. Today we're going to dive into talking about vibe and how vibe can help you connect with your readers. I'm Melody Ann, your host, and we're here to share with you useful advice and strategies to help you succeed as an author. And for part of that, you can go into authornation.online to access a treasure trove of resources just for you. So whether you're sipping your morning coffee or out for a long walk, listening in as you walk, let me introduce our guest. Jason Del Gandio has a PhD in communication studies and has been studying vibes for 30 years. He is a published author, an award-winning teacher, and an engaged intellectual. For his doctoral work, he developed his own philosophy of the vibe referred to as bodily emanation. He has published essays on the topic in both scholarly and popular presses. His latest project is called 20-Minute Vibe, which is an educational space for learning about the vibe, offering videos, essays, and self-paced video lectures for people who are intellectually curious. He also currently is working on an academic book about vibes, tentatively entitled, and you should always have a good working title, right? Vibe Talk, how and why people talk about vibes. Let's welcome Jason Del Gandio to the show. Hi, welcome to Author Nation.
Hi, Melody. How are you?
I am fantastic. So I'm going to just jump right in and start by asking, what do you mean? Because, we're both in communication here, right? So we both know we have to agree on the definition. What do you mean when you say vibe?
Sure. Well, I'll first back up for a split second here. And I want to invite your listeners to take note over the next week or so how often they either use the word vibe or they hear someone else use the word vibe. And that could be in face-to-face conversation, over text messages, in a song, on television, in a movie, etc. And I almost guarantee you'll be surprised at how often you hear the word vibe or some variation of. So vibe, vibes in the plural, vibrations, energies, frequencies, mood, atmosphere, so on and so on and so on. Now, in terms of the most basic definition I can think of, we can think of vibes as the exchange of energy between you and other people. So again, the exchange of energy between you and other people. Now, the first question, though, becomes, what is the nature of this energy? So, for instance, is this energy a physical phenomenon or a metaphysical phenomenon? Is it material or immaterial? Is it scientific or spiritual? Perhaps it's all these things and then some. And then to drive home the point, though, I want to provide a few examples for your listeners, right? Some basic examples. So, for instance, think about going on a first date. And usually for a first date, we evaluate that date in terms of the connection we have between ourselves and the other people. But that connection is often translated into the word or terminology of vibes. So, for instance, it was a good vibe, a bad vibe, a romantic vibe, a sexual vibe, platonic vibe, a weird vibe, and so on. Or think about going to a musical concert and you're there with thousands of people. You're all there for the same reason, listening to the same music, and all of a sudden your bodies fall into rhythm and fall into sync with each other. And that's an embodied experience that we often call a vibe, like at the concert on the dance floor. Some kind of example would be at a sporting event. You're there with 20, 30, 40, 50,000 other people. You're all cheering for your team. Your team wins at the end, and you feel the electricity in the stadium, right? Or on the flip side, though, we talk about bad vibes and negative vibes. So, for instance, let's say it's a really intense work meeting, and everyone there is in a bad mood, the boss on everyone's case, and it's literally a bad vibe in that room, and you can feel that in your body. Then conversely, think about your friends or your family members. Sometimes it's a good vibe or a bad vibe. So, for example, maybe you get into an argument with your best friend, and for a few hours, a few days, or even a few weeks, the vibe between you and the other person is off, right? So these are all basic examples of when we experience a vibe and how we might define and explain a vibe.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I really like that. So I want to talk a little bit before we talk about writing and vibe. I want to talk a little bit just about, bringing a vibe to our lives and in our everyday. You talked about being at work or with family. I want to have a positive vibe. I want to exude a vibe that helps me connect with others. How can I determine my own vibe? How can I exude the vibe that I want to exude?
Sure. Well, the first step really is becoming more aware of the vibe, like vibes in general in your daily experience. The way I walk people through this is at first, become more aware of your body and more aware of your surroundings, right? So how do I feel internally? How do I feel externally? Where am I at in my immediate surroundings? Who am I with? How might my surroundings be affecting me either positively or negatively? And I say that because you want to be more aware of your space and place. Because if you're just in your head all the time, then you're kind of cutting yourself off to the energies that we're going to be talking about, right? Then from there, though, try to soften your ego and soften your perception. In other words, think less with your conscious mind and think more with your overall bodily awareness, bodily intelligence, and bodily knowing. Right? Then from there, you might try to imagine that your body is emanating or radiating a certain kind of energy or a certain kind of vibe. Right? So try to imagine that and envision that in your daily life. And then from there, though, try to lean into this exchange of energy. Right? And I say that because although everyone gives off a vibe and we can all feel vibes, it takes practice. And you have to make kind of a habit on a daily basis, and that will help you out in your daily life with vibes.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I've met people who I feel like they just kind of walk around angrily all the time, right? They have this kind of angry vibe, and then you meet somebody else, and they have this just really soft, gentle vibe, and then you meet someone else who's bouncing through life, right? Kind of like the Tigger vibe, right?
Yeah,
So
totally. Yeah.
okay, let's kind of, can we transition that to writing now? How might we exude a vibe in our writing?
Sure. Well, the first thing I think of is narrative voice. Right?
Mm,
So, what voice do I hear in my head when I'm reading your work? What is the personality of this author and this writer? Right? Then we can also think about different writing choices. So, for instance, the choice of vocabulary and language. Right? We might think of each word as evoking a certain kind of feeling on the page. We can also think about the length of a sentence or the length of a paragraph, the length of a chapter, right? So if a sentence is really long or a chapter is really long, it takes more intellectual work to get through that as opposed to short writing, which is a little bit easier, right? We can also talk about scene and setting. Like all these things matter, right? So in many ways, you might think about in terms of what kind of world are you evoking on the page, and then how
mm,
does that world make people feel, right? Another way of putting this is that you can think of every writing choice as a form of affective communication, affective with an A, so affective
yeah,
communication, right? And so again, everything that you write, everything that you type, everything that you produce is evoking some kind of affective experience for the reader. And so you can be aware of that as the author and try to make choices that evoke and match the kind of vibes you're looking for.
yeah, yeah. And I've been thinking about this, and I'd like to add something and maybe get your feedback on it. I've been thinking about, a lot of people, they go to the beach in the summer and they want to beach read because a beach read has a vibe. It's a genre that has certain tropes that make us feel a certain way. And then Halloween comes along and we don't want to read beach reads. We want to read, Stephen King and thrillers and, things like that. And so, you know, I'm thinking about vibe. Would you agree that different genres hold their own vibe through everything you've spoken about, plus the tropes that we use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I don't see why that wouldn't be the case, right?
Yeah.
So every genre. So again, I'll just repeat what you said. I do
Yeah.
agree that every genre has its own vibe, and the vibe of that genre is partly defining that genre. Like, how does that genre make me feel internally, externally? When I talk about a certain genre with my friends, what kind of discourse is evoked in our conversations, right? All those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then I think about other kinds of genres. So, for instance, a memoir is by its very nature very personal, right? Like you're disclosing part of yourself to the world, which is much more intimate, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe of that genre. But
Yeah.
then I think on the other end of the spectrum, something like a medical textbook,
Yeah.
right, which tends to be very dry, very fact based, could be very impersonal as well, right? Now, having said that, though, I don't think something like a medical book has to be so dry and impersonal, right?
No.
So, as an author, you have the freedom to write that book however you want.
Yeah.
To draw a loose analogy here, if I think about going to an in-person doctor visit, one of the ways that I evaluate that visit, that doctor, is by the bedside manner of that doctor.
Yeah.
Is the person supportive? Is the person inviting? Is the person encouraging, etc., right? And so why can't that same type of experience be evoked on the page, even in a medical book? So if you're
I
writing something that dry, right? Like think about these kinds of choices and place your clients and patients at the center.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. That is, it's interesting you say that, because that's something I work with authors on. They come with these really dry topics, and and the information's really interesting if you present it in the right way, if you use stories, if you use characters, if and so part of what I do is helping people take what they feel is for them interesting but boring for the rest of the world, and help them create something exciting with that. All right, let's turn our attention a little bit for a moment to the vibe of an author off the page. And so the example that comes to mind is, I often say to authors, look, if you're an author, you're in business, right? You have a product, right? You're selling something. You teach, and you have college age kids coming in. In some ways, they talk about you. We're always selling something. Right? It's true. We're selling our kids broccoli at dinner, whatever it is. We're always selling something, or trying to persuade someone. And yet, when authors think about going out and talking about their book, they start feeling like a used car salesman, right? They feel like the vibe is icky. And I think that just how can you exude a different vibe when how you feel inside is so icky about what you're doing. Can you just comment on that? Maybe walk us through some
Yeah,
ideas?
I mean, I could say a lot about this. This is more of my forte than anything else. But so at this point in my life, I've been to and witnessed plenty of poetry readings, book promotions, so on and so on and so on. And a lot of authors and writers don't necessarily like being out in public with people. They prefer to be home by themselves in their office writing, etc., which I totally understand. I totally get it. I'm intellectual. I'm by myself all the time as well, right? But if you're going to agree to do these book events, then use it as an opportunity to present yourself to the world, and not just your book, right? But you as a person, right? So if I go to the bookstore and I buy your book, I can read your book anytime I want, right? This might be the only chance I ever get to meet you in person or see you in person. Right? So use this as an opportunity. One way to think about this is you're like a performance on stage. And in some cases, you might actually be on a stage, right? But any good performer, any good public speaker, any good musician or comedian is aware of the performative moment and knows how to live up to that moment. And part of living up to that moment is the vibe itself, right? Try to focus on what vibe you want to emanate out into the audience, and how will your vibe make them feel? How will it entice them to like you, to appreciate you, and want to buy your book, right? And with that, you want to think about being sincere, authentic, and be yourself, right? And one of the ways to do that, though, is to be in the moment and be present in the moment. Now, when I say that, I don't mean just do it off the cuff, right? You want to rehearse and practice, etc., right? But when you get to that moment, though, try to be yourself and be genuine. And most human beings respond favorably to that kind of experience and that kind of vibe.
Yeah. I find that when I'm out and I see authors, especially the newer authors, their first book, their kind of first tour, their first reading, they tend to have the sense of apology around them.
Interesting.
Right. That, it's like, well, I'm sorry I'm here. I'm
Okay.
sorry I'm asking you to buy my book. I'm not sure I deserve this space or this stage. And that's also the vibe.
Sure, 100%. Yeah. And in some ways, that's endearing because they are being sincere about that, right? And so I want to applaud that, and also applaud the fact that they're working outside of their comfort zone, right?
Yes.
At the same time, though, you can work through that, though, and still be sincere while also being self-confident, right? Well, by exuding a certain kind of charisma. And actually, that's a good word to use here. So I think charisma and vibe are very much related, right? And so as an author doing book events and promotional events, how can you develop your charisma, right, in such a way that's enticing to other people, right? Use your charisma. And I don't mean mug people for their attention, because that's a different kind of thing, right?
No.
That usually comes off fake and phony, right? But use it as a way to, again, invite them into your world and grace them with your presence in a very genuine and sincere manner.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I love the idea of vibe, and you can learn more about it and at 20minutevibe.com. As we said earlier, Jason, you have videos there. You have self-guided material, lots of cool things. I think that sounds like a really great place to go check out Vibe. Thank you for building that. And if people want to check it out, you can find it at 20minutevibe.com. Okay, you are writing a book. Are you writing a book for academics, or are you writing like an accessible book for people who do not have a PhD in your area?
Somewhere in between. So in many
Okay.
ways, it is a book of scholarship, right?
Okay.
So I'm working through other scholars that have written about the vibe. I'm working through certain kinds of high-end theories and philosophies, but I'm trying to make it accessible to someone who doesn't have a PhD, right? I don't believe that all knowledge and intelligence has to be so esoteric and arcane that nobody can understand it, especially if
Yeah.
you're writing about vibes, right? And so in many ways, I'm really chronicling how people talk about vibes, and not just in the year 2025 and in America, but
Right.
really throughout human history across different cultures, whether it's North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, so on and so on and so on. One of the things I've discovered in this process of writing this book is that the interest in human energy systems is global, intercultural, as well as historical. Right? Many people throughout the world will use the actual word vibe or some variation thereof that translates into their language. And that's kind of what
Right.
the book is about. Yeah.
Very cool. And I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Right. That somehow doesn't surprise me. I think that, you know, if I think about, again, someone who seems to stomp through life versus somebody who seems to bounce like Tigger, there have been people like that historically. There are people like that globally in all the cultures, and obviously we are going to talk about it in one form or another. And vibe is one of the words that we can use to describe, how we feel energy from other people,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. So, people who are listening and they're like, this is really cool. This is really interesting. And I want to figure out how I can, figure out my vibe, or figure out how to exude my vibe in life on stage in my book. Can you just give us like 3 ideas on what we can do and how we can kind of take those first steps to become, as you say, aware enough to be able to make choices around this consciously?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the first thing is to become more consciously aware of the vibe you're giving off on a regular basis, right? So if you're not aware of it, then you have no control over it. So try to consciously attune yourself to your own vibe on a daily basis. Then from there, though, also try to take notice of how people are responding to your vibe. And that could be on a daily basis, like your core personality, but also relative to each situation and each circumstance you find yourself in. Right. And then from there, though, also learn to practice and experiment. Right? And I say that because no one person gives off the same vibe all the time. And not everyone's going to respond to your vibe in the same kind of way. Right. So you want to experiment with different kinds of vibes in different situations with different people, but then also practice and see what works, what doesn't work. And in many ways, try to make it into a habit. So it's similar to meditation and, let's say, mindfulness. Right. You have to practice those things on a regular basis to reap the benefits. Same thing with a vibe. Although we all give off a vibe all the time, you have to make it a habit. You have to practice it, and you have to elevate to a certain kind of a conscious way of life, right? And then from there, you can get more complex. But I think as a basic starting point, those 3 things you can start there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting because, yes, we all have a vibe, but we don't always have the vibe we want.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, here's how you can become aware of it, aware of how your vibe affects other people, and then be your own scientist with your own vibe. Experiment until you are living consciously and exuding the vibe that makes the most sense for who you want to be and how you want to present yourself. So that makes perfect sense. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated your time. I've enjoyed this conversation. If people want to follow your work, where can they find you?
They can just go to the website you already mentioned, which is 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com. And from there, you can find my Instagram page, Facebook page, as well as YouTube page.
Beautiful. Oh, you have a YouTube too.
Yes.
Brilliant. Excellent. You are a very busy man. You're teaching, you're writing, you've got a YouTube. You're a busy guy.
I am.
You are. Jason, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for joining us today on Author Nation. I hope this conversation has provided you with some insights into what vibe is and how you can shift your own vibe, in real life and also on the page. And remember to visit authornation.online for all your resources that you need to go from idea to published. And of course, I always really appreciate your feedback and your support. So I know you love this episode. It's a great topic. Give us a review, give us a comment, let us know what you're thinking, and share it with someone who you know needs this right now. Because your participation helps us continue delivering the insights you need to succeed. So keep writing, keep creating, and continue sharing your unique stories with the world.